Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the first training tape for the Motor City Area Officials Association. My name is Shane Smith. I'm one of the basketball trainers for the association, and our leadership felt that there was a general lack of availability of film as well as educational opportunities, especially in season, to provide quality training. And that oftentimes the meetings that happen every Monday, we are too busy working on the floor, and so it can be difficult to actually talk about what's happening in our games. And so one of the things that we set forth as a goal was to make training and film and access to education and quality information easier for you to access, as well as something that you can use in your pre-games or as you're going out throughout the rest of the season. And the goal of ours is to talk about plays that happen regularly as well as plays that are unusual. We also want to have an emphasis on the rules, their application of it, but we are also going to focus heavily on philosophies and guidelines of good officiating and hope to pass those on that will be effective for you as you work not just through the remainder of this year, but also in the future. These videos will be available on YouTube, and you can access them at any time, like I said, as a part of your pregame or moving forward whenever you see fit. We also intend to put forth other training videos in the off season to help us continue talking about plays, coverage, mechanics, rules, and everything else that we need to become better officials. So that's our goal. If at any time you have questions or want to reach out to us, I will make sure to post our email address at the end of the video. So with that, the way these playlists are going to work is I've watched a tremendous amount of film, as well as a couple of other people within our leadership team, and we've selected plays from the first half of the year. Today we have 11 that we're going to focus on. And these plays are designed to be good discussion points, as well as things that we can take forward again to hopefully improve our game and make officiating in the metro area a little bit more consistent and accurate. And so those 11 plays will be we'll be looking at the video, discussing applicable rules, and then talking about the various aspects that include positioning, mechanics, and everything else that's a part of the play. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into our playlist. Our first play today, our first set of plays, is actually going to talk about one of the new rules. And before we get started, I actually want to just quickly reference that the film that we're using today and in every other playlist that we have moving forward is not intended to single out any official, coach, or player. The plays and commentary are provided and selected by myself and members of the leadership team, and they are for the sole purpose of improving rules knowledge, mechanics, judgment, and consistency throughout the area. There is obviously no intention to single anybody out or to talk about any specific game or play, but these are good plays that we've selected that we think would be appropriate for training. If at any time throughout the year you feel like you have an unusual or a good play that would be useful for us as a part of our training, please feel free to reach out to one of us and we will take a look at it. One of our goals is to try to get access to as much film as possible. Currently, this is somewhat limited just based off of what coaches are willing to share with us. Our goal is to, much like football, make this a standard practice across the area. So with that getting said, let's go ahead and start at our first set of plays. And so one of the new rules for this year is to adjust where we inbounds the ball. Anything other than an out of bounds, and we are going to one of the 4 designated spots in the front court by the offense. And so as we're watching film for the first couple of months, one of the things that we have noticed is that this is something that at times we are falling into old habits. Most of us aren't thinking about it. It's not intentional. This is something that's just going to have to become habit for us about where we move these inbounds plays. It will become important in some situations, though, because there are some advantages of taking the ball out at the 28-foot mark or 3 feet outside the lane space, as opposed to having to inbound the ball in a corner or on being able to go to the baseline versus the sideline. And so coaches are going to begin to start drawing plays and defenses for these 4 positions, and it's important for us to know when we go to them and when we don't. So to quickly reference the rule, this new rule establishes 4 throw-in spots, the 28-foot mark on each side and 3 feet outside the lane line on each side when a team is retaining or gaining team control in its front court due to a violation, a common foul prior to the bonus, or any other stoppage in play other than an out of bounds. So if we're inbounding in the front court, offense is maintaining possession. As long as it is not an out of bounds violation, we are going to one of these 4 designated spots. So to help us out on a diagram here, the semicircle above the free throw line to the elbow, make a direct line from the elbow to the corners. Anything there is going to the baseline. Anything outside of that is going to one of the 28-foot marks. One of the things that we have noticed, especially in some of the gyms, is that the positioning of the benches can sometimes get in the way, and so we're moving the inbound spot one way or the other in order to provide space. Ideally, we wouldn't want to do that. Obviously, each circumstance is different, so do what's best for the game. But one of the things to note is that the benches should not be extending outside the 28-foot mark. And so if there is space and you notice that half of the bench is outside the 28-foot mark, either have game administration or go ahead and just move some of those chairs to make sure that, 1, coaches, when they stand up, are in the coach's box and not outside of it, and 2, to make administration of these throw-ins at the 28-foot mark a little bit easier. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our first play. Pretty straightforward play. Just simply an out-of-bounds call, and our officials do a good job of recognizing that this out-of-bounds spot is going to be in the corner. And so because it's an out-of-bounds violation, we're putting it in the exact spot. Now, one thing I do want to talk about in terms of mechanics, this is not something that is officially in the mechanics manual. However, we support this as a good move. You'll notice the inbounds play is all the way in the corner, and our lead official has decided to hop on the inside to administer this throw-in. We support this move. All of the action that this official is going to need to officiate is happening inside. It's in the key or in the wing area, and if we're outside along the sideline, not only do we have a player and a ball and a pass that's going to be interfering with their line of sight, the distance as well is just going to become problematic for being accurate with whatever action is happening inside that area. And so it's a much more effective mechanic to hop on the inside to administer this throw-in. And we definitely support this move. Realistically, anytime we're getting halfway outside toward that sideline, feel free to hop on the inside and you'll be able to have a better look on the action you need to see in your primary. So we're getting ready to administer the throw-in, and the coach for the team throwing the ball in calls a timeout. Now, this is one of those situations where if we have a live ball situation and we call a timeout on the front court, we are going to one of the 4 spots. But in this situation, because we already have an inbounds play due to an out-of-bounds violation, the request of a timeout does not move this inbounds. So when we come out of the timeout, we're still going to be inbounding the ball on that S. We're not going to move it inside to that 3-foot spot outside the lane line. If the ball was live and we were dribbling in play or passing, if it's a live ball timeout, we would go to one of those 28-foot marks. But in this case, because we were inbounding the ball, we're going to keep the ball there. And again, there's a casebook play that references this. Team A has possession of the ball in its front court when the ball is deflected out of bounds by Team B. Exactly what we saw happen in the play. The ball exits the court along the end line and close to the right sideline, almost again identical to what we saw. Team A is granted a throw-in at the location where the ball exited the court. While Team A is trying to inbound the ball, Team A is granted a timeout. After the timeout, the throw-in spot returns to the same spot. And they add a comment to this. Since the ball was not on the court, the timeout did not create a stoppage in play. That would move the throw-in spot to one of the 4 designated spots. Play will continue from the throw-in spot established by the deflection of the ball by Team B. And this is designed to make sure that coaches can't request a timeout in order to improve their inbound spot. One of the things with this new rule obviously gives an advantage in putting one of the 4 inbound spots that are, just to put it mildly, easier for the offense to inbound the ball. In those situations where there's an inbounds in the corner due to an out-of-bounds violation, that's going to be harder for the offense to inbound the ball. The advantage somewhat shifts to the defense, and so the Rules Committee didn't want to advantage the offense by being able to move that inbound spot. So sometimes coaches may ask you about this type of situation. If they call a timeout, will they move it? Or a coach may just try to call a timeout and request that it's moved and see if they can get one by you. Recognize that this is not legal. All right, so that's our first play. We have a second play as well to look at inbound spots. So in this case, we have the offense who has inbounded the ball, has the ball in the front court, and then we have this kind of messy situation in which the ball is deflected, and then we're retreating into the backcourt. So again, we have possession in the front court by the offense. We have some pivots. The ball goes into the backcourt. And this is a very difficult play in terms of coverage. I'm going to trust our officials that they got this right. It does look like it was last to touch by red in the front court and first to touch by red in the backcourt. And so we come through with a backcourt violation. So good job coming in strong, blowing the whistle, killing the play. That this is a backcourt violation. Now, if we go back to the play and see where the ball was touched, where did the violation actually occur? In this case, when we go back, the violation occurs right here. So we're just about at that volleyball line, right? Clearly in the backcourt of, at that point, Team A. When the violation happens, Team B is now going to be inbounding the ball in their front court. And so this is one of those situations, and we've seen a number of examples as we've been going through film of this exact type of play on a backcourt violation. We should be administering the ball here at the 28-foot mark, not at half court. And so because the violation took place in Team A's backcourt, Team B is now going to be taking possession of the ball in that location. We're going to move this to the 28-foot mark and not at half court. Again, it might not seem like a big deal, but if we get to a last second, end of the quarter or end of the game situation, being able to maybe throw directly into the post or being able to have different options going right into an offensive set, that distance can actually matter to a team. And so it's little. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but these are things that anybody on the crew can pick up on, and we just want to make sure that we're moving these situations to the appropriate inbound spot. Okay, so again, where did the violation take place? If it's now an inbounds in the front court, we are always going to one of those four spots. All right. Play number 3, this is our last in this sequence, looking at inbound spots. So to give you a little bit of backstory on this play, we had an out-of-bounds violation on the baseline. Again, just like our first play, this play is being inbounded in the corner. And so, again, this is a very difficult inbounding position for the offense. The defense has a slight advantage here. And so because we're putting the inbounds position exactly where the ball went out of bounds, this is the appropriate spot. So what's going to happen, and I know the film doesn't show it great because we don't get the angle there, is that the defender, number 1 for white, kicks the ball. And so now we have a kicked ball violation. And so because this is not an out-of-bounds violation, this is a violation by Team B resulting in an awarded throw-in for Team A, we are going to move this inbound spot to that 3-foot lane space, or that 3-foot space outside the lane line. So what was a very difficult throw-in spot for the blue team now becomes significantly easier because the defense committed a violation. And so appropriately, the spot gets moved inside. And this was well managed in terms of our new mechanics. Now, again, just starting back on the original inbounds throw, notice the lead official, again, is hopping to the inside. This is a good mechanic, and we would encourage you that in these types of plays that you put this mechanic into your game. All right, so that's it on our plays regarding inbounds positioning. Now, one of the other new rules that the Federation gave us this year discussed players leaving out of bounds. In previous years, if a player left the boundary line, went out of bounds for an unauthorized reason, it was an automatic violation. So as soon as somebody ran out of bounds, we were supposed to have blown the whistle, announced the violation, and given the offended team the ball. What the Federation has done is they've now modified that rule to line up with what the NCAA and the NBA have in their rule, which now is if a player leaves the playing floor, they cannot be the next player to touch the ball inbounds. And so again, to look at this rule, 933 establishes that a player may step out of bounds without penalty unless they are the first player to touch the ball after returning to the court, or if they left the courts to avoid a violation. So if somebody decides to leave out of bounds to avoid a 3-second call, that would be something that would still be an immediate violation. But for the most part, if players are running around screens or they're trying to gain an advantage through an angle and they run out of bounds, this is not going to be an immediate violation. It is only a violation if they're the next player to touch the ball. So there's been a little bit of confusion about how this rule interacts with some of the previous rules that we've had regarding players going out of bounds. This idea of being the next player to touch in bounds is sometimes can be seen as in conflict with other rules. And so we have a situation here that's going to help us clarify this situation. And it's important to know that the previous rulings, the previous rules about a player going out of bounds have not changed. It's only about a player most of the time that's going to be off ball where they are gaining advantage through around a screen. So in this case, we have a rebounding play. It's a loose ball. The white number 24 is going to try to save the ball. He's going to toss the ball back, attempting to a teammate. His momentum is then going to continue out of bounds. He's going to then return back in bounds and then touch the ball. And so we have that save. He now reestablishes back in bounds and then is the next to touch. And so the question is, based off of this ruling of 933, this would make it seem like that this is a violation, that this is a player who left the playing surface, not an immediate violation, re-enters the playing surface, and then becomes the next player to touch. 933 would indicate that that's a violation. But in order to actually understand this type of play, what we need to do is actually look at a different part of the rule book. And so I have two case play situations to help us understand this rule. So casebook 711 situation B. A1 blocks a pass near the end line. The ball falls to the floor inbounds, but A1, who is off balance, steps off the court. A1 returns inbounds, secures control of the ball, and dribbles. This is a legal play. A1 did not leave the court voluntarily and did not have control of the ball when leaving. And so this is important for us to understand the difference between a player voluntarily going out of bounds to gain an advantage or not a basketball play. And that's the way I want you to try to think of these plays. If they leave the playing court because of a basketball reason, their momentum carries them out of bounds. So an example is a player is going up for a layup and they miss the layup and their momentum carries them out of bounds. Can they come back in and reestablish? Most of us would say, of course, that's a yes. These are the same types of plays. If there's a basketball reason, a part of the action itself that causes them to go out of bounds, they're allowed to come back inbounds and be the next to touch the ball as long as they reestablish their position inbounds. So if they get that foot inbounds and they reestablish position, they now can legally be the next to touch the ball without committing a violation. So our second casebook play, A1 jumps from inbounds to retrieve an errant pass near a boundary line. A1 catches the ball while in the air and tosses it back to the court. A1 lands out of bounds and is the first to touch the ball after returning inbounds. Returns inbounds and immediately dribbles the ball. Picks up the ball after returning to the court and then begins a dribble. In A and B, this is legal. So again, a player is saving the ball. Their momentum takes them out of bounds. They can legally return inbounds and be the next to touch the ball. The reason it's why is it's illegal in C. When they pick up the ball, that is now ending their first dribble. So when they threw the ball back into play, that is considered a pass. They possessed it. They're now past the ball. When they return to the court and they possess it again, that's what they mean by picking it up. They've now possessed it again. That initial dribble or pass has now ended. They are no longer able to start a new dribble. That would be a dribbling violation. It is not a boundary violation, though. And so, again, we've seen a couple of these situations throughout the year so far in which players their momentum is taking them out of the play, and they are re-entering the play. They are reestablishing position. Oops, that's the next play, sorry. They are reestablishing position inside the playing court, and then they're the next to touch the ball. This is a legal play. This is not what they're referencing in the new rule change for 933. Again, most of the time when you're applying 933, it's because a player is trying to get around a screen or potentially get around a rebounder in order to gain an advantage in that play. It is not a momentum play, it is an advantage play. And so those are two different types of situations. Okay? All right. Play number 5. The next set of plays we're going to be looking at traveling. And if our leadership team has had one focus, if we could change one thing about area officiating, it's understanding and effectively officiating the pivot foot and traveling violations. Traveling violations, when we call them in the game, oftentimes come with the least amount of feedback from coaches, players, and fans. It's something that just everybody accepts in the game. It looks awkward. They expect it to be a traveling call. And so oftentimes when we don't call a travel, it's when we get more feedback than when we actually do call a travel. The problem with this, though, is that it incentivizes us to call things that look awkward, that are weird, that seem to be unorthodox or maybe even unathletic, that we just put whistles on those and call those travels, when in reality, when we watch the film and we establish what the pivot foot is, the player didn't travel at all. And so what we've done in that circumstance is we've just taken the ball away from Team A, taken any chance for them to be able to score on that possession, and giving it to Team B. This happens a number of times within a game. You'd be surprised how much the final score can be changed simply by removing these possessions and making them turnovers. And so for coaches that do pay attention to this, this is one of the annoying things. In listening to a couple of college coaches, one being John Beeline, this was something that was a huge pet peeve for him. When there was a traveling violation that was called in one of his games, it was one of the first plays that he looked at on film to see if it was a correct call. And when it wasn't, he was incredibly frustrated because he just lost that possession, that opportunity to score. At that level, they're expecting a number of points per possession. And if they just had a 0 because of a turnover and it was because the official screwed up, it's very difficult for them to justify why that's the case. And so what we want to do is try to establish a better understanding of what the traveling rule is. It can sometimes be complicated. It can sometimes be annoying for fans and for coaches and for players because they're used to all of these awkward plays being ruled to travel. But what we'd rather do is get these plays correct. And so to start, let's actually look at what the traveling rule is. We're not going to go through this entire rule today, but over the course of the videos, we'll have plenty of examples to look at to bring up these various points of the traveling rule. So a couple of pieces today that we're going to focus on is simply just the pivot foot. Traveling is moving a foot or feet in any direction in excess of prescribed limits while holding the ball. The limits on foot movements are as follows. So Article 1, a player who catches the ball with both feet on the floor may pivot using either foot. When one foot is lifted, the other is the pivot foot. So it makes sense. Player is not moving, they catch a pass, or they gain possession, they're allowed to pivot using either foot. They get to determine that. It's always legal depending on which foot they pivot. Okay? A player who catches the ball while moving or dribbling may stop and establish a pivot foot as follows. So if they're not still, if they are moving, they can establish a pivot foot in a couple of ways. First, if both feet are off the floor, so they jump to get a rebound or to catch a pass. If both feet are off the floor and the player lands simultaneously on both feet, either foot may be the pivot foot. So if they land at the exact same time, again, they get choice. Do not be pure on that. If you can't hear two different sounds, if it's not a thud thud, if it's just a single sound, they landed simultaneously. If they land on one foot followed by the other, the first to touch is the pivot foot. This just makes sense. And if they land on one foot, the player may jump off that foot and simultaneously land. This is something that's a little awkward for us. So the way that we want to think about this is booms. 2 booms are good, 3 booms are no good. So if they land on one foot, that is now their pivot foot, looking at Article 2A, number 2, right? That's their pivot foot. They can lift their pivot foot. Now, normally, if we look at the rest of the rule, if that pivot foot lands before they pass or shoot, it's a violation. This is the one exception to that. They're allowed to land on one foot, then jump and land simultaneously with both feet. That's 2 booms. The first initial boom off of one foot, and then the second boom as those feet land simultaneously. That is the legal move. Now, if they try to pivot off of either one of those after that jump stop, that is now a travel. That would be that third boom. That's now illegal. All right, so if they land on one foot, they may jump off that foot and simultaneously land. However, neither foot can be a pivot in this case. So they can catch, land off one, then come to a jump stop without traveling as long as they don't now pivot. All right, if one foot is on the floor when they possess the ball, it is the pivot foot when the other foot touches in step. So that first foot, again, is the pivot foot. The player may jump off that foot and simultaneously land on both. Neither foot can be a pivot in this case. And so, again, just like that previous situation. So it is also important to know that once they've established a pivot foot, it can be lifted but not returned before the ball is released on a pass or a try for goal. So when that pivot foot is lifted, a player must do one of three things. They must either pass, shoot, or call timeout. If they try to start a dribble, if they bring that pivot foot back to the ground before they do anything else with it, it is a violation. That's where our travels come from. So that's the basis for the traveling rule. What this really means is we must get better at understanding two things. One, when does the player gain possession? Obviously, you cannot travel, you cannot establish a pivot foot until a player has gained possession. And so if they don't have possession of the ball, we do not have a pivot foot yet. And so on those very quick plays, or those plays where it's uncertain when they gained it, give the benefit of the doubt to the player. Do not be pure on these. Second, once we know that they have possession, which of those situations is occurring to establish the pivot foot, and what can a player do based off of that? So this first play we're going to look at is a play in which the crowd, the players, everybody wants to travel because it looks awkward, it looks unathletic, it looks unusual, and therefore it must be a travel, correct? Let's find the pivot foot and figure out whether the player actually traveled. All right, so again, let's go back. Let's find the pivot foot. So we are still dribbling. We now have possession. Left foot is down, that's the pivot foot. Pivot foot is lifted, right foot goes down. Then we have a shot attempt. This is a perfectly legal play. It is not a travel. Again, pay attention to when the ball is possessed and when which foot is the pivot foot. Again, there's nothing in the rule book about timing, about fluid movement, about the type of motion that a player can have. As awkward and as jumpy and jerky as this movement is, if we just watch the feet, that was the last dribble. There's the first step on the pivot foot with the left foot. There's the second boom with the non-pivot foot, and there's the shot attempt. Perfectly legal play. Okay? All right, let's take a look at our next play. Again, incredibly awkward play, right? Again, if we look at what is happening here, player with no defense. They're assuming the player is attempting to make a pass, realizes his teammate is not paying attention, and there's a defender in the way, and so awkwardly now has to do something with the ball. This looks weird. It looks crazy. Everybody's going to jump up and down for a travel. Let's watch the feet and see whether it actually is a travel. And look, the player doesn't even protest, right? He even thinks that this is a travel. So players coming up into the front court, still dribbling. All right, so let's go back a couple of frames here. See if I can get this back a couple frames. All right, so dribble. There's our first step. That's our pivot foot now, right? Now we have the second step and a pass. This is a completely legal play. Again, it looks awkward. It looks unusual. Everybody's going to be begging that this is a travel, but this is not a travel. It's just an awkward play. Player takes two steps, two booms, then passes the ball. Completely legal. And so again, make sure we're paying attention. When is the ball possessed? Which pivot foot is the pivot foot? What can a player do once they end their dribble and have established a pivot foot? All right, if we can do those things and focus on those things, we'll get a lot better at calling these plays correct. All right. All right, so that's it on travels. Travels will make a regular appearance in our playlists because we, as an area staff of officials, can always get better at looking at these, and there's never a shortage of examples of looking at travels. All right, next set of plays is on legal guarding position. So if we're looking at legal guarding position, right, what must a player do to establish legal guarding position? So 423.2 and 423.4. To obtain an initial legal guarding position, the guard shall have both feet touching the playing court. The front of the guard's torso should also be facing the opponent. So they must be facing the opponent, and they must have 2 feet on the playing court. They can't have one out of bounds, right? They can't be standing on one foot. They must get 2 feet on the floor, and they must be facing the opponent. All right. Then we have 423-4. If the opponent with the ball is airborne, the guard shall have obtained legal guarding position before the opponent left the floor. And so this is where the difficulty in calling blocks charge plays comes from, is that not only do we need to know, did the secondary defender establish legal guarding position? Do they have 2 feet on the floor and are they square? We also have to pick up, when does the offensive player leave the ground? As soon as they leave the ground, that defender must be legal. If they're still sliding, if they're not completely there yet, even though we may have chest-to-chest contact, they have now undercut an offensive player, and that is a block, even though by the time that that contact occurs, they may be completely stationary. And so the tough part here is seeing the secondary defender early enough to then find the offensive player in order to determine when they leave the floor. So a couple of plays here, just again to kind of focus on this part of the rule. There we have it live, where we have kind of a fast break play. We have a fast break play in which we have a cutter that's trailing the play, is going to accept the pass. We have the white defender who is now going to try to take the charge. And so the question is, does he establish himself as legal before the shooter leaves the ground? Now, a lot of coaches are going to hate this call, as you can see that this coach hates it here, because the player does set up deep. He's underneath the basket when this contact occurs. And in other levels of basketball, this would obviously be a block because they have a restraining arc. But in Federation basketball, we don't have that. And so the rules support this as being a charge if he established his legal guarding position before the player left the ground. If there's enough contact to cause the defender or both players to go to the ground, we cannot have a no call here. This does need to be either a block or a charge. And so the question is, did he establish legal guarding position? So if we can freeze it here, the player has now landed. If you look, the defender right now looks to be fairly legal. As we slow it, the shooter is now left. The defender has established. They take it in the chest, to and through. This is a correct call for a charge. So again, not going to be the most popular call in the gym, but it is right by rule. All right, next play. Again, looking at legal defenders. So in this case, again, pay attention to the secondary defender. It's going to be the player on the white team with the long sleeves. He's going to come over and try to take a block, try to draw a charge rather, and it's going to lead to a decision that we're going to have to make. Now, quick mechanics discussion. You look at the ball being on the right side of the floor. You look at where we're positioned in a triangle, lead and trailer table side. Is this an appropriate time to rotate? Lead can potentially think about it, but with a one-on-one matchup on the other side, we would definitely support lead staying put and watching this play develop from the other side of the lane line. So what that means is we're going to trust our partner here at center to be able to officiate a one-on-one matchup, especially because a drive is almost immediate. So here we go. All right, so again, let's take a look. Did the defender establish legal guarding position before the offensive player left the ground to shoot? So this is a play that offensive players are starting to move into their game, much similar to the Euro step that's been brought in. They are trying to what we call slip the defender. So they're going to try to move laterally in order to slip the defender in order to avoid that charge call. It's a very smart move by an offensive player, especially if they can do it under control to avoid that massive collision. So what that means is the defender, if they're going to move with them, needs to move legally. So if we look here, let's slow this down while we can. All right, at this point, it looks like the defender is facing 2 feet on the floor, so that makes them legal. Once they've established legal guarding position, they are allowed to move laterally, obliquely, or they can retreat backwards in order to maintain legal guarding position. In this case, though, when they move, they still must beat the player to the spot, and that's the key to this play. As the offensive player here looks to slip, to slide to his right in order to avoid the contact, the defender slides with them. And so in order for this to be a charge, they have to beat them to the spot. But if we go back a couple of frames, what we're going to see is that the offensive player is already in the air, and the defender is still sliding over to try to take that charge in the chest. And so that sliding move, while the offensive player is in the air, is an undercut. Right? They are not allowed to undercut an offensive player. In this case, if they were to draw this charge, they would have had to beat them to the spot in that lateral movement. While they are allowed to move, they still have to own that spot first. They don't do that in this case. This is an undercut and should be ruled a block. A really kind of tough play because the contact does happen chest to chest. It does look like that he goes through them, but again, we have to make sure that we're officiating the contact of the defender and understanding when does that offensive player leave the ground. Once they leave the ground, that defender must be legal and can't do anything to undercut or adjust their position in order to draw the charge. Okay? So again, tough play, but if we can pick up that secondary defender a little bit earlier and be able to officiate that, we can maybe get plays like this right with a little bit more, what's the right word? The greater number of percentage of our plays. All right. Next play, again, similar play. We're going to see a secondary defender. It is the defender on the white team that's in the middle of the lane now. He's going to come over and try to, again, draw a charge. So again, one more time at full speed. So a great job by our lead official recognizing the secondary defender did not get there legally. Right? We now have an airborne shooter at this point. Is our defender legal? Nope, still sliding over to his right in order to take this in the chest. The shooter has no way to adjust to this contact. This is a great call for a block and an and one. So again, take a look at that secondary defender. They must be legal, 2 feet on the ground square, and must beat the airborne shooter to that spot in order to draw the charge. All right? 2 more plays here that don't really have a theme, but I think are really good discussion points for us to look at. This first one is a transition play. There's going to be a 3-point shot in the corner. One of the defenders for the white team is going to go out and challenge the shot and is then going to transition into a box out. So it was a really good job by our trail official in order to continue officiating this play all the way to the end. They officiate this play, they take the shooter all the way to the floor. They know exactly how this player gets to the ground. It's illegal, they call a foul. So it's a really good job by our trail official staying connected to the play, recognizing that this is too much contact and that we need a whistle on it. So now the question is this a shooting foul or is it not? So if we're looking at this play, should we be awarding the visiting team here? Should we be awarding them 3 shots as a shooting foul? Or is this following the shot and the green team should be getting an inbounds, in this case on the baseline? And so for that, again, let's look at the rule support that we have. If we look at an airborne shooter, the active shooting begins simultaneously with the start of the try or tap for field goal and ends when the ball is clearly in flight and includes the airborne shooter. That last phrase is what's important here. It includes the airborne shooter. The try starts when the player begins the motion, which habitually precedes the release of the ball, what we typically consider the upward motion. So as soon as that upward motion of the shot begins, the try has begun. Any contact from that point, including an airborne shooter, is now a shooting foul. So what that means is when the player has returned to the floor, they are no longer an airborne shooter. The active shooting has now ended, and so any foul that takes place as a result of that will not be a shooting foul and instead should be on the ground and awarding an out of bounds, an inbounds for the offended team. All right, so again, let's take a look at our play here. When the contact occurs, is the player on the ground? Well, they've now landed. Even though they haven't gathered, they're back on the ground. That active shooting is now ended. We then have the contact as a part of the box out. This should not be considered a shooting foul. This should be provided as an inbounds award for the visiting team. Now, again, any official on the floor can help with this in order to make sure that we judge this to be correct. You don't necessarily want to be too pure with this, but one of the guidelines here is if it's in the initial challenge, as that defender is coming out to challenge that 3-point shot to contest it, if that's where the contact is, a lot of times you can get away with awarding that as a shooting foul because the majority of times, overwhelmingly majority of the times, it will be a shooting foul. If the contact happens in this case, where the player has successfully challenged and contested that shot, has not committed a foul, then turns, and the foul actually takes place as a result of the box out, more times than not, that should be on the floor and not a shooting foul. It's not guaranteed, it's not all the time, but that can be a good guideline or philosophy to use on whether we're actually going to award a shooting foul or take this ball out of bounds. Okay? And our last play for the training tape is our play and call of the week. So this is a really good job by our trail defender, and I want to talk a little bit about mechanics as a part of this play. So we just entered the front court. Our lead is table side, center opposite, trail is table side. And we're going to get a drive here from the wing to the basket. And if you look at where the contact is from the secondary help defender, what we're going to realize is lead has a really poor angle to be able to see this contact. It's nothing that lead did wrong, it's just the way that this develops. When we get this contact at the rim, as we can see, we have the lead on the baseline at the tee. We then have our offensive player kind of looking through his back. We then have a defensive challenger that's going to contact is going to be on the inside of the arm. And so for our lead official, there's a lot going on that they're going to have to look through. We're not Superman. We don't have x-ray vision. Looking through the back on this type of play is going to be difficult to see, was this a clean block? Was this contact illegal? And so it's not unreasonable for our lead to say, you know what, I don't know definitively that this was illegal contact. I'm going to let it go. So let's watch this full speed. And now, having taken that into consideration, let's take a look at this contact. Understanding why lead may struggle to see this type of contact, right? This is a really good job, and this is why it's our call of the tape. By our trail official to stay connected. Oftentimes at trail, we can think, especially at plays at the rim, we don't need to be involved. We don't need to pay attention to this type of play because we shouldn't be making calls here. And while we don't want to do this with regularity, while we don't want this to be something that we do multiple times in a game, in the right situation, we need to make sure that we're helping our partners here. Our trail does a really good job of being a great partner to our lead official, recognizing that our lead official can't see this type of contact very clearly. And if we look, who does have the perfect angle to see this contact, who's looking straight through this matchup, it's trail. So even though they are the farthest away from this play, they have the best angle to determine whether this is legal or illegal. They are on, not only have the open look looking through the contact, but the contact is on the inside of this matchup, which means that if you look at lead and center, they're stacked on the same line. Trail is the one that's looking through it on this inside contact, has the best look. This was a great job by our trail official to stay connected to this play, recognize that not only is this contact illegal, but neither one of my partners has a great angle at this contact. This is something that I need to come in and get from trail. Now, what makes this even better is our trail official has a proper secondary cadence, a play in which they recognize this is not my primary, it is not my first crack at this. However, I know that I have a great look at this. I know my partners don't. I'm going to give them a chance and an opportunity to get this play. They don't because, of course, they're stacked. I recognize that as the trail official. I now come in a beat late. I give them the opportunity. Clearly, this is a foul. We need to have a whistle. And so as soon as I recognize that my partners don't see it, I'm going to come in late and get this foul from trail. This is really, really well done and a high quality level of officiating to be able to help our partners out on a play that clearly is a foul and the game is going to need it. So again, when we're shipping it in from a secondary coverage play, when we're going outside of our primary, we want to make sure that we are late. Be late, okay? It needs to be big. It needs to be something that not just you can see, but everybody in the gym knows it's a foul, and we need to be right. If we can do those 3 B's, we'll be really good at helping our partners out. Again, this should be a rarity, but there are plays where this type of thing will happen, and if you are connected on this type of play, you can really help out the crew, and then film is going to support it, and it is a great job. So that rounds out our plays for the week. A couple of just final comments moving forward. We have begun a YouTube channel where all of our training tapes as well as future training videos will be posted. This is something that we're hoping to build as a resource for officials to use, not just in season but also in the off season. And so look for opportunities, videos, resources to be posted here, as well as any other content that we feel would be useful or appropriate in our variety of sports that we sponsor. You can also visit our website at MCAOA.wordpress.com. Our email address is mcaoa313@gmail.com. Feel free to send us an email on any questions or concerns that you have there, and we'll make sure to get back to you as soon as we can. So feel free, again, if you're looking for information about our organization, our association, who's involved, who the leadership is, or how to join. That information is provided on the website. And again, we're hoping to build these resources throughout using the internet, using lots of film and training opportunities for any of the area officials, regardless of what association you join, whether it is the MCAOA or any of the other area officials. And so with that, I know the training tape went a little long. Most of them will not be this long, but I wanted to set an understanding about how we're going to use film throughout the year. If at any point you want access to one of your games, the association has put forward the resources to establish a huddle account for basketball, so we can request exchanges from coaches. If there is a specific game that you would like to see that you worked, please send us an email and we'll put the request in from one of the two coaches, and hopefully we can then send that game to you for you to access. Our goal is, again, to start building a tradition and an expectation in our area that not only are coaches sharing film, but we're using film effectively to develop proper and appropriate training for both officials as well as coaches too. And so with that, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have the next training tape for games that took place in January, and then as we get ready for playoffs, we will again provide additional resources. Again, my name is Shane Smith. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you gained something useful from this that you can apply in your games moving forward. Have a wonderful day and good luck rest of the season.